Hello class, this is Professor Morrison and this is your presentation regarding arguments of evaluation and the essay assignment. In this essay, you will be judging the quality of a film. Your writing purpose in an essay of evaluation is to judge the quality of the film as a work of art with sound reasons based on your careful analysis of specific elements of the film, while at the same time avoiding personal judgments about the film or director based on life experience or taste. You will compose an essay where your goal is to judge the quality of one of the three films presented to you as choices and defend your judgments with clear reasoning and support. You will support your judgment with sound, fair, thorough evidence based on clear, fair criteria that has already been established by the industry. You will not be defending a judgment on whether you necessarily like the film or not, but whether the film is good based on as objective criteria as possible. So you're going to evaluate subjective works of art in an objective manner and avoid all personal taste or preference. And you will explain the reasons for your judgment beyond matters of personal taste. An evaluation is meant to determine the value of something. And so you need to look at both positive and negative aspects of the subject in a critical manner. So distance yourself, distance your emotions from your evaluation. Nothing is ever all positive or all negative. Look closely to see if you can find some of both. The key is to examine the film closely, understand each criterion that you're using to evaluate it, avoid adding personal taste or emotion, and address both positive and negative aspects of the film. So to be truly critical, you must be neither a fan or a hater, but somewhere in between. In order to judge a work of art fairly, I would need to first establish fair criteria or standards on which to judge the effectiveness of its message, and then carefully analyze the work itself to see if it lives up to those standards. Thankfully, these standards have already been invented and they're well established as criteria for each genre. We'll get to that in a couple slides. But what we want to do is look at the criteria and measure and weigh our work of art against them. And that way we can come to a logical conclusion that a film is written, directed, and performed at a high or low level of quality, and for the most part, and it is either good or it is not. And whether or not we like it, it really doesn't matter. We're using the criteria instead. So, in order to defend a judgment, an evaluative essay, you need to have a basis for evaluation or many bases for evaluation. And there are many criteria to use to come to that conclusion. So, for example, we have rubrics that we use in class, and we have categories inside each rubric. And this is how I grade assignments. This is the same thing. You're going to grade the film based on the categories already created for you in the criteria. Now, you want to make sure you're not making up your own. You really cannot do that. Criteria for evaluating any work of art for all genres have already been established by the experts in those areas. You just need to select the appropriate ones. Let's think about some movies that we may have seen. We may enjoy movies in many different genres, but we don't hold movies in different genres to the same standards as we would movies within the same genre. So think about these two very different films. Is 12 Years a Slave held to the same criteria as Spider-Man Homecoming? Well, no, they're not. Are they both what we might consider to be good movies within their genres based on the industry established criteria? Yes, they are. But we want to make sure that we are holding them to the standards that are established for them and not for other genres. And there are so many genres. If you go to Netflix to see the genres, it may take a while just to read them all. One of the movies that you could select to evaluate for this essay is The Stranger from 1946. Its genres include crime, drama, and film noir. So it's mainly a crime movie, but it's also a drama and it is definitely film noir. So let's look at the different categories here. So crime, and these are all from IMDb. Whether the protagonists or antagonists are criminals, this should contain numerous consecutive and interrelated scenes of characters participating, aiding, abetting, and or planning criminal behavior or experiences, usually for an illicit goal. Not to be confused with film noir, they're not the same thing, and only sometimes should be supplied with it, and in this case it is, and this is subjective. Drama is the next category that this particular film falls under. And drama is so widely used, and you'll see why in a second. It should contain numerous consecutive scenes of characters portrayed to affect a serious narrative throughout the title, usually involving conflicts and emotions. This can be exaggerated upon to produce melodrama, and it is also subjective. And this whole essay is subjective. It is the bookend to the argument of fact, which was completely objective. Now we have evaluation. And so we really need to use this criteria to decide whether or not this movie is a good example of this genre and what makes it stand out, if anything. The third genre for this film is film noir. Typically features dark, brooding characters, corruption, detectives, and the seedy side of the big city. Almost always shot in black and white, American, and set in contemporary times relative to the shooting date. So remember, this was made in 1946. We take the view that this genre began with Underworld in 1927 and ended with Touch of Evil in 1958. And this is completely objective. It either is film noir based on these reasons or it is not. And in this case, it is. But your job would be to decide whether it is a good example of these genres and which scenes make it qualify for that, and what stands out as being its most brilliant scenes, or in your, you might say not brilliant, but in this case The Stranger is, it's critically acclaimed and for a great reason, and I hope that you'll choose it. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, this one is Charade from 1963, and I confess I love this movie. I grew up watching it, and others from this time period, and they were like my Sunday night movies at home, and I really enjoy this movie. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. That's for you to evaluate. For genre, we have comedy, mystery, and romance. And so for comedy, the category of comedy, it says that in order for a movie to be considered a comedy, virtually all scenes should contain characters participating in humorous or comedic experiences. The comedy can be exclusively for the viewer at the expense of the characters in the title or be shared with them. Um, it wants us to know that there are different types of comedy, different keywords. So, spoof, parody, irony, slapstick, satire, black comedy, all of those are different types of comedy, and we're not actually going to be worried about subcategorizing. But if the title does not conform to the virtually all scenes guideline, then the comedy genre would not be used. So this is straight from IMDb. So we want to make sure that virtually all scenes, maybe not every single one, but virtually all, should contain these humorous or comedic experiences. Now, for mystery, which is another genre for this movie, should contain numerous interrelated scenes of one or more characters endeavoring to widen their knowledge of anything pertaining to themselves or others, usually but not always associated with crime, and is subjective, just like comedy. So, not everyone finds all things funny, but this is mystery. This one is not combined, in this case, with the genre of crime. And then we have romance. Should contain numerous interrelated scenes of a character in their personal life with emphasis on emotional attachment or involvement with other characterized, especially those characterized by a high level of purity and devotion. Reminder, as with all genres, if this does not describe the movie wholly, but only certain scenes or subplot, then it's, kind of just the keyword instead. It's not pure romance. And this is, again, subjective. So it's up to you to decide if this really does belong in the romance category and how well it fits each of these categories and which scenes do you think make it fit these categories or not. Okay, so my son wanted me to include a horror movie as an option for you guys, and I said no. And he said, why not? And I said, because then I'd have to watch it to see how they evaluate it. And he told me, oh, I'll sit with you and make sure you keep your eyes open the whole time. And I said, that's okay. We don't need to do that. I know just the film. And so I really actually very much enjoy this movie, What We Do in the Shadows. This is not to be confused with the TV series of the same name made by the same people. We are only evaluating the movie from 2014, not the TV show. We're just sticking with films here. And its categories are comedy and horror. And while there are elements of horror here in my evaluative experience, I think comedy is, well, it's definitely listed first, we'll say here. So for comedy, again, we already know what makes something a comedy. Virtually all scenes should contain characters participating in humorous or comedic experiences. The comedy can be exclusively for the viewer at the expense of the characters in the title or be shared with them. And then for horror, should contain numerous consecutive scenes of characters affecting a terrifying and or repugnant narrative throughout the title. Note not to be confused with thriller, which is usually not based in fear or abhorrence. And again, both are subjective. So you would then describe the scenes which best fit these criterion, and you're going to decide whether it's a good film or a bad film, or it's a good comedy but not a great horror, or whatever it is you decide to evaluate it as. In addition, you want to avoid summarizing the plot or simply describing the characters in your essay. We've all seen the movie, some of us many times. And in an evaluation, all you really need is a 2-sentence overview of the story. And if you are going into detail about a certain character or a plot element in your body paragraphs, then definitely you should include that. But instead of summary, you would have analysis. So you want to make sure that you're not just summarizing. You're presenting evidence and analyzing how they're relevant to the points you're making. I have provided several reviews that are critical reviews for you to consider. Some are in writing, some are in form of video. All of them would be okay for you to use as sources, but you're not required to. You don't have to use them. You may not agree with them either, and they may not even agree with each other. but you should at least read them. Okay, so what are you doing for this essay? What's your prompt? Here it is in 3 easy steps. Step 1, select one of these 3 particular films to review. Not any other film, only one of these 3. Being sure to present criteria for evaluation and overall judgment in your thesis statement. Where do you get these criteria from? From the previous slides that have the criteria on them for each of the movies. Step 2, examine the criteria for the multiple genres that the film falls under. You will need to make a value judgment in your thesis and 3 categories from the genres to support it. And then step 3, decide how well the film corresponds to the categories of its genres, making note of specific scenes that showcase the characteristics of the criteria. Place the details in the body paragraphs to support your thesis. Your thesis statement for the argument of evaluation essay should be framed in such a way that it includes the elements from the following formula. X is or is not a good Y because it meets or does not meet criteria A, B, and C. Now, you don't have to phrase it exactly this way, and each prompt will call for slightly different information, but this should be a guide for you. Your finished essay will need to state the central claim clearly, but also in a way consistent with your purpose in the essay itself. And you must have a plan of development. You need to list your criteria at the end, and then devote your body sections to those matching criteria. Requirements for your essay include an interesting and significant evaluative claim, an effective exposition of your claim's significance and rhetorical context, 3 well-explained and defended criteria, an examination of your claim in terms of the stated criteria, evidence for every part of the argument, not only for your evaluative claim, but also for your criteria selection, particularly if you suspect your audience may not share your ideas about what is most important. Warrants. In other words, use the Tolman framework. A consideration of alternative views and counterarguments from the audience most likely to be interested in your claim. Effective essay structure. You will have 8 paragraphs total. You'll have an introduction, a conclusion, and 2 meal plan body paragraphs for each body section associated with one of the 3 criteria. So you will have 3 criteria at the end of your thesis statement, and then 2 body sections for each criterion. You will also need to have proper use, citation, and documentation of source material in compliance with MLA 8th edition guidelines for dealing with sources, including a works cited list at the end of your essay. You must also include a minimum of 3 credible sources. You may use each source more than once. You may select from the sources I have provided. You may also select your own sources that you have evaluated carefully. Be sure to include a minimum of 1 correctly cited quote, summary, or paraphrase per body paragraph. Use the meal plan to compose your body paragraphs, and each paragraph should be approximately half a page long, double-spaced. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm only an email away.